Hello, this is Felice Ford, and I am auditioning for Politiscope as the host or moderator. And as my audition, I will be reading the transcript of an interview on the Rachel Maddow show from Tuesday, April 7th, 2015. The mayor of North Charleston, South Carolina, Keith Summey, today, explaining that the officer in this case made a bad decision. The city has done the right thing by arresting him. There have been a number, of course, of high-profile police shootings of unarmed citizens in recent months in this country. Shootings like that, honestly, very rarely result in police officers being criminally charged. It has happened a few times in the last months. In February, there was a Colorado police officer who was charged. The same week, New York City police officer was charged again February. In January, 2 Albuquerque officers in New Mexico were charged. But it is the rare incident when a police officer does find themselves as a criminal defendant after a shooting like this. I want to bring into the conversation Andrew Knapp. He's a public safety reporter at the Post and Courier in Charleston, South Carolina. Mr. Knapp, thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
What it seems like is the publication of this video changed the trajectory of the investigation and maybe even the speed of action around this case. Is that fair to say? How do you see this as having unfolded over the last few days?
Absolutely. Once the video came out today, and once we knew of it, once the authorities knew of it last night, I think things moved fairly quickly. And like the family said, like many city officials have already said, without the video, there's no telling if investigators could find out truly what happened. But fortunately, for getting to the bottom of this, there was a witness there who happened to be filming it, and that video really resulted in the arrest of this officer today. What do we know? What can you tell us about how the video arose? I mean, obviously this incident happened on Saturday morning. You can tell from the person remarking to themselves as they're shooting the video that they know exactly what it is they are seeing. They recognize the gravity of what they've caught on film. Do we know anything about how the video eventually got to the family and then into the public record? Well, I know the person who shot it was a young resident of that area, and he brought the video to the family, like you've already said. And then the family turned it over to us and some other media outlets as well. But I think there was some hesitation or apprehension on the part of the resident who filmed it as far as bringing it forward to the authorities who are actually investigating the shooting. And here in South Carolina, as the state law enforcement division, which typically investigates officer-involved shootings, it's not the police department itself, the force on which the officer served. But there was still some hesitation there by the resident, but he eventually brought it to the family, and I don't know what the timeline was, but I know it was in the authorities' hands at least by last night. So like I said, things have moved very quickly. Andrew, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is I know that you've reported previously on relationships between this police department and the local community. Is this a high-pressure relationship, or is this an anxiety-ridden relationship between the police and that particular community and local folks? It really depends on who you ask. A lot of the residents of mostly black, poor communities in the city will say that there are some strained relations as far as their relationship with the police department. But the city officials in the past few years have tried to address that by opening a line of communication with community leaders, activists, and those people. Those leaders say that the communication with the police commanders has gotten better, but at the same time, the rank-and-file members of the police department still... there's still some strained relations there with the residents in the community. I don't recall any incidents like this in my memory, but there have been other controversial shootings in the past involving North Charleston Police Department. And this has been an ongoing thing for the department. It's been something they've been trying to address, and I think that this shooting tonight over the weekend was a culmination of that. Andrew Knapp, Public Safety Report for the Post and Courier. Thanks for helping us understand the context here. Appreciate you being here. Sure. MSNBC national correspondent Joy Reid is not only here, but she's been in contact with representatives from Walter Scott's family tonight. Joy, thanks for being here. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Remarkable press conference. Their attorneys and direct relatives of the man who was killed. What have you heard in terms of the family and their concerns and what they think has happened here? The initial concerns were that for 4 days the officer's story in their mind was a fabrication. The initial story by the officer was that Walter Scott posed a threat to him, attempted to take his taser, and was violent towards the officer. And that essentially has allowed to tan as the story. It was the story that his then attorney also told, and then you have the officer's attorney. the officer's attorney, who is not representing him, we understand now. And so the family felt that over the course of that time, the story has just brought hook. It was just bought without question. I see. Then you had this person come forward. We don't know yet who this person is, but they filmed so much of this encounter. Later in the tape, if you keep going, you see the second officer comes up. There is an interaction between the other officer. So you wonder, what did the second officer see? What did the other officer report happened? There is the question of whether or not the officer in question dropped or put something down near the body. So there are a lot of questions that this videotape at least appears to begin to answer. And in terms of the rebutting of the case that stood for 4 days with the officer's then attorney saying this was the officer's actions were warranted because he felt threatened, has there been any rebuttal to that officer's perspective other than this videotape? Any other witnesses come forward? Does the family have any reason to rebut the case? Well, there wasn't any other independent evidence, but what's interesting when I saw the tape, Rachel, what I thought about was the question of this fleeing felon rule. These old laws that used to be on the books that allowed an officer to use deadly force simply because a suspect was fleeing. Whether or not they pose a threat? Whether or not they pose a threat. So I called Kendall Coffey, who we both know, the former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District in Florida, to ask whether or not, even if there had been no videotape, whether it would be problematic for a police officer to shoot someone who was clearly running away. And he essentially said, as a constitutional matter, as you look up the case is Tennessee versus Garner, 1985 Supreme Court case, that actually the only circumstance in which a fleeing suspect can be shot, an officer can use deadly force, is if that person clearly posed some violent threat. They were accused of a violent felony. Well, in the case of Mr. Scott, he was like this was a traffic violation. He had nothing in his record that was more serious than failure to pay child support. Things like that were in his record. So there was nothing obvious about him that made him an obvious danger to the officer. So then you had the officer say he attempted to attack me. I was in fear because of my life because of the taser. So there's a lot, I think, about the story that even independent of the video, you'd have to ask whether a suspect like this person posed enough of a threat clearly running away. I think that's the question the videotape actually obviously brings up. And that gets you to the legal that gets you to the legal question, and then of course there's just the narrative and human incredible drama of having this videotape dramatic and ultimately deadly encounter and having that change what apparently is going to be the path of accountability or a search for justice in this case. MSNBC national correspondent Joy Reid. Joy, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Thank you. All right, we got lots more ahead. Stay with us. Very busy news night tonight.